with us today for an act of repair, a conversation that will reflect on the possibilities of care, healing and repair within our institutions and our practices. These may seem like simple or familiar words, but in a world marked by uncertainty and a deep erosion of empathy, they carry an urgency and relevance that cannot be overstated. Reflecting on the subject are three deeply engaged voices from the field of contemporary art and cultural practice. We are honored to have Sharmini Pereira, Chief Curator of the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka, and Mohamed Almusibli, Director and Chief Curator of Kunsthalle, Basel, Switzerland. Two individuals whose work spans institutions, forms, and geographies and continue to shape how we think about the role of art and institutions today. Thank you for traveling such a long distance to be with us today. Guiding us through this exchange is Premjish Achari, who needs no introduction to the city, a curator and writer based in Delhi, whose curatorial practice spans a diverse range of exhibitions. You can read the titles in the brochure because he's done a lot of them. I'm not going to read all. Premjish also received the Helvetia Art Writers Award in 2021, leading to a residency at Atelier Mondial in Basel. He was also honored with the Prameya Art Foundation's Art Scribes Award, which included a residency in France. His writings have been featured in a number of notable publications. Beyond his curatorial and writing work, Premjish conceptualized and initiated the Kai Kolkata City Lab and the Orissa Craft Odyssey in Bhubaneswar. He previously served as a visiting faculty member at Shiv Nadar University, teaching art history and theory for 7 years, and currently holds the position of curator at the Kiran Museum of Art in New Delhi. Before I hand it over to Premjish, just a quick thanks to everyone who made this gathering possible. The India Art Fair, thank you for partnering with us, and thank you to your entire team for all the support. To Method Gallery for generously opening up your space to host this conversation. A shout out to Experimenta Gallery for inviting Mohamed and Sharmini to the Curators Hub. They in fact arrived from Kolkata just this morning. And finally, to my entire team at Pro Helvetia, Aman Kaur, Chitra Kalyani, Saloni Anand, and our newest team member from Nepal, Sedon Ukyab Tenzing. Thank you for working tirelessly over the past weeks to bring this evening together. And with that, I now invite Premjish to lead us into the conversation. Thank you.
Hello. Am I audible? Hello. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining on this Sunday evening. And when we were here, I think I reached around 4 o'clock. And we were not expecting, because it's a Sunday evening, that this kind of crowd, in this enormity, will gather here. And there are many familiar faces and there are new faces. And to the familiar faces, I tell you that, or I suggest, or I say, understand your priorities. You should be at home, it's a Sunday. What are you doing here? But thank you. Why? Because over the last few years, I've noticed that this tendency, what you call participatory culture in Delhi is shrinking. I think if you have noticed that earlier when, I'm not saying that when we were young, in that kind of scenario, but this passion to attend talks, the passion to attend events, be part of discussions is really shrinking. That culture is really shrinking. And I think it's very important for all of us to revive that culture of dialogue, conversation by coming together in these events. And not only to listen, but to actively participate in engaging in a conversation, in engaging in a dialogue, and also asking crucial questions to whoever is speaking. I think that is very important for us to nurture that kind of spirit of dialogue and conversation. And I'm thankful to Method for hosting this and providing this space here. Thanks to the team members of Method for providing us this space. And to the lovely friends at Helvetia, who I know for many years now, like family members and all. Thank you for, again, sustaining the cultural dialogue and cultural activities across South Asia, which is very crucial that it's not only Indian in nature, but it's very South Asian in nature. And that is something which Rahab and I were also discussing earlier, that it's very important to nurture that spirit of South Asia. And we should not be country specific, but we should identify as a region. That's very important for us. And in that context, I would also like to thank Sharmini and Mohamed for joining. And I don't know how you are feeling. 2 days of extensive talks, interactions on the curatorial, and then an early morning flight, sitting here. Are you guys here? Yeah. Thank you. So I'll start with an introduction. Sharmini Pereira, I met you in Jaffna some years back during a conference. Sharmini is the chief curator of the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Sri Lanka. And she is the founder and director of Raking Leaves and co-founder of the Sri Lanka Archive of Contemporary Art, Architecture and Design. She was a guest curator at the Aga Khan Museum and for the Abraj Capital Art Prize and co-curated the first Singapore Biennale in 2006. Her writing has appeared in Southeast of Now, Moose Magazine, Guggenheim Online, and many other important magazines like that. Between 2005 and 2010, she was a trustee for Book Works London and is currently part of the Advisory Council for Arts and Culture, Asia Society India, and the International Council Center for Book Arts, New York. Thank you, Sharmini, for joining, and I welcome you to this session. And with us, we have Mohamed Almusibli. Since March 2024, Mohamed has been the new director and chief curator of Kunsthalle, Basel. Almusibli previously served as co-founder and curator of the independently operated art space Cherish in Geneva. His curatorial work is characterized by a sensitive engagement with contemporary artistic positions. He has demonstrated a close connection to artists of our time, an innovative perspective on the use of new technologies, and a great interest in connecting local and international scenes. For his visionary program design, he focuses on innovative and emerging practices. And in 2019, I think Mohamed will also talk about that. He co-founded and directed the non-commercial art space called Cherish in Geneva, along with James Banton, Thomas Liu Leland, and Sir Serpas. Until 2023, Cherish hosted over 20 exhibitions, providing a platform for emerging local artists while also enabling several international artists to have their first presentation in Switzerland. In 2021, he organized the Almusibli Panorama, an extensive year-long online video program for the Center for the Contemporary Art in Geneva, which concluded with the inaugural Swiss Moving Image Award. Thank you, Mohamed, for joining, and I welcome you to this session. So I'll do a brief introduction, and then we will listen to both of their presentations, because I think for most of us, they are speaking for the first time in Delhi. So it's good to understand what their practice is, what have they done so far, to engage in certain questions and interactions that will follow later. But the act of repair is something that interests all of us, and we think as practitioners of contemporary art, this term, repair, and also the other terms associated with it, sharing, caring, and all have been in circulation almost for the last 3 decades. And there have been various strategies, curatorially, artistically, participants and cultural workers have come up to, to address the inequalities, the disparities in the cultural spaces, and to make these cultural spaces more expansive, more inclusive, and to be more open. And that's the attempt. But we also have to understand the rules of repair, very critically. The rules of care, this terminologies that are deployed has to be also understood critically, that they are not neutral terms, that care is not neutral, sharing is not neutral. We need to understand the various facets of it, like who do we care for? Who do we share with? And these are some of the important questions that we need to ask while we are engaging in these strategies. So this very notion of care, which the curatorial task was bestowed with, that you have to care for the objects, have now been shifted for a long time, that you have to care for the subject, especially the marginalized subject. So there's a major shift from the object domain of art to the subjective, especially the marginalized subject domain. And all of these terminologies that I talked about, they are also fascinating theoretical constructs. A lot has been written about it, a lot circulates about these terms and everything. But it's also very important to understand that how these theoretical frameworks, conceptual frameworks, also engage or enter into the lived realities, especially into the post-colonial settings like us. And the adoption of care in institutions, particularly in nations grappling with the legacies of colonialism. And it also prompts a very important question for me, that is this a truly organic response to local needs? Or does it at times represent a new form of neo-colonial ambition? So, and in most cases, these categories, care and repair, have been pushed as ethical imperatives. These are not aesthetic categories, but they operate in the world of art. And there's a huge debate about this between art historians and all, that all these practices have only been assessed via the framework or via the parameter of ethics, but none of them gets scrutinized by the aesthetics of it. But still, it's an important ethical imperative. But can these be applied clinically? That these can just go and just simply care for people. But we have to understand that all these acts go through continuous process of negotiation. They are not easy to implement. They are not easy to translate. And at times, they also go through subtle distortions as they encounter the practical constraints of budgets, established hierarchies, and the inherent human imperfections of those tasks with their implementation. So the discussion that we are going to have in Delhi today is about all these complexities. It's about this moment where these ideas are brought into this specific cultural, geographical, and intellectual context of Switzerland, of Sri Lanka, of India, and South Asia. And I have divided after their presentation, the discussions into three phases. One will be on collaborative practices and the shared nature of authorship. And the second discussion will be about institutional critique and systemic repair. And the third section will be on ethics and the limits of care and repair. So before I get into that, I invite Sharmini, would you like to start? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here back in Delhi, a place that I have visited many times, but I also have spoken here before about MMCA. I was just going to mention that with Shudha. We were in conversation about MMCA Sri Lanka as part of COACH, and just to remember that some conversations have already happened here. And I'm very grateful as well to Helvetia, to all of the team there for bringing me over, and to the India Art Fair as well for making that possible to get me over from Calcutta. And that's a shout out too, because of everything the Experimenter team did towards bringing me over from Sri Lanka. It's wonderful to be able to speak in this context that has just been introduced. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with my esteemed colleague as well, Mohamed. I'm going to just say a few words about the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka, which is the museum that I'm involved in leading at the moment. I will just need to figure out how to get my slide presentation in. Maybe someone could do that while I'm speaking. So I'm going to give you a very short, perhaps just a window onto what MMCA Sri Lanka is. Thank you. We can put it on to review. So the MMCA Sri Lanka was set up in 2019. It's the first museum in Sri Lanka that is focused on modern and contemporary art. We have over 120 museums in the country. This is a country, just to remind everybody here in the room, that Sri Lanka is a population of 21 million. We come like 76 in the most populous countries in the world, whereas India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, you're all in the top 10. So, and I just want to get into competition with you because this is our usual dynamic. What I'm saying really here is that the focus of the museum is very important because the focus is looking back at the period of history that we have to start thinking about and defining in terms of the modern and the contemporary. And maybe the care that has been put to one side, it's not being cared about. No museum has in the country so far publicly wanted and wished to look after that period of making and thinking and writing. So the need for that museum is very important, and it was informed and surrounded by, so many questions. And perhaps some of them are, just thinking about the care from the perspective of how we understand curatorial practice, which everybody, I think, has spoken a lot about and written a lot about. The curator is the carer of objects, and that museum is the repository and the place of care. But nobody has been doing that for modern and contemporary art in Sri Lanka. So that is perhaps one of the reasons we have set up the MMCA. But also, what kind of research is required when we think about the histories of art in Sri Lanka, given what I've said about this sort of 120 years of making. And also, I just want to add in there that why has contemporary and modern not been recognized by the state, principally where we see the greatest concentration of museums, who have rather looked at heritage? And why is heritage not modern? Why is heritage not now? Why is heritage not contemporary? But I think also, as I said, many, many questions came into thinking about why we set up this museum. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that how can, in terms of building a museum of the kind I'm talking about, how can that perception of art shift away from recognizing it solely as something that can be traded, as solely as something that is associated only as a commercial commodity, and that artists are that commodity and the work that they make is something to be transacted. So the launch of MMCA was hence sort of informed by many of these questions, and I think the predicament was really how to prise open all of these questions whilst maintaining some kind of equilibrium. It was that, and that's a process that we are going through now. So it's partly investigative at this stage. The stage of where we are with the museum that I'm leading is very much, I call it the silent phase. We have not opened a building yet, and I'll come to that in a moment. But perhaps also that other question, how to prize all these questions open whilst maintaining some kind of equilibrium, is also to think about what does a museum, MMCA Sri Lanka, like that rooting of it in a place, and not the Sri Lanka Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, which would nationalize it. What does that, how do we stay locally rooted whilst being, internationally relevant, whatever that means? Because that's what all museums are about today, being locally rooted and internationally relevant. So we're all the same, are we? I want to mention too that the MMCA is a non-profit organization. We are supported by various different kind of income streams. We don't have any government or statutory funding in the country, so we rely on grants, donations, sponsorships, etc. We don't have a single patron, as in one patron who writes a check or one donor that pays for what we do. Right from the very beginning, we've established a very robust governance structure as well. So in my job, I manage a team and I also manage up. I'm very accountable to my board above me. We didn't begin, I've already mentioned, we don't have a building. We didn't begin with funding. We didn't begin with an endowment, a corpus, as I know it's often referred to here. We didn't begin with a collection. So we had this fantastic start. We began with nothing. And I think, what's really shaping what we do now is this process of being able to think it all through. What I would also say is that we are therefore really a museum in the making. That's how we have wanted to refer to ourselves at this particular period. This slide here, and I'm going to talk to the slides. This was one of the first exhibitions that kind of got, dropped in. It was curated prior to us launching, but it was an exhibition called 100,000 Small Tales. And it took on, it was the right show to launch MMCA because it took on this sort of fanciful, almost mammoth task of imagining what would a history of art look like in Sri Lanka. Not artists, artworks, if one were to put it together in an exhibition, because we don't have the written art history. So we were thinking, or I was thinking in this exhibition about it really as a sort of inventory. How does one start to recognize those artworks that were in some way paradigmatic within an artist's practice? Because in Sri Lanka, what we recognize is the name of the artist. And that is what everyone knows, but nobody could tell you a work by them, to speak to you about them in more detail. All the works also in this exhibition, they were displayed, and this was just something I wanted to share with labels. And, there's this whole, it's been very interesting to think about that role that, although we call them labels, didactics, information. What role do they play? And, there's such a divide between having them and not having them and how to pass that information over. There's something that we also do at MMCA that we have adopted right from the get-go, which is we do everything trilingually, Sinhala, Tamil, and English. And there's no other cultural institution in the country that does that. We are a trilingual country. We have the three languages as recognized officially and nationally, and they have also particular status and priority, which informs policy and planning and so on. And it's Sinhala first, Tamil second, and English is seen as the link language. But what happens if you, as a Tamil speaker, constantly seeing your language come second? What does that start to inculcate towards you? I mean, thinking about repair and care and so on. So what we had to do here or think through is how does language actually show this sort of blatant disrespect for our communities of artists to begin with? Haven't even got to audiences and the public. But in our exhibition, therefore, we had labels which had, obviously, they were there in English, Sinhala, and Tamil. There's a lot of labels, which perhaps some curators would have come in and said, it's too much labels, just get rid of them, too distracting, and so on. But another piece of information that we insisted on putting in those labels was where each of these works had been exhibited. And why did we do that? Because we wanted to recognize that there was this history of exhibition making that had happened, and these works had their own, not institutional memory, but exhibition memories that were tied to when they had first been sometimes commissioned, and so on. And it was trying to also perhaps imagine this, create this value infrastructure or this value that was attaching itself to them that allowed these artworks to sit at arm's length from the commercial. How do we think about value that is not just a number? Through the exhibition that these artworks have been in. This is such an important part of an artist's practice. And, you know, as I've mentioned, there was no, or it hasn't really yet been this one piece of, or pieces of historically accurate artistry written about Sri Lanka. And so in terms of, therefore, how does one kind of wrestle with that? Is that we're involved really, I feel, in practicing art history. By practice, I mean we are thinking about it in this exhibition spatially. And we're practicing it as well as spatially, we're practicing it in this critically reflexive, we're hoping it's critically reflexive in the arrangement of artifacts with one another. I want to just move on quickly, and I'm just kind of just wanting to give a sense of sort of how we're thinking, but, you know, in subsequent exhibitions, for example, the one here, which is called Encounters, I think some of you might recognize here is George Keat. So when I said people remember the names of the artists, but they can't tell you in detail about the work, George Keat is just the name everyone, it's the chocolate box name of the artist everyone knows. So we want to create, you know, this conversation about Keat through his work. So this was an exhibition that put Keat's work here, as you can see, in conversation or next to a work by an artist. It's a Keat work from the 50s, by the way, and it's put into conversation with an artist called Asai Rasaya. So he's an artist from Jaffna. So these are very, you know, these are places that have not been so far really recognized as producers of artists and so on. The Rasaya, or the Keat is a 50s work showing a family, sort of idyllic, very typical Keat representation of the family. Next to Rasaya, work from the 70s. Rasaya just, you know, rejected the frivolity of Keat in the 70s and said this has no relationship to the realities. 70s was the time of great hardship in Sri Lanka. And so Rasaya here is adopting a style, I suppose, which is much more kind of a social realist style, if we're going to use sort of perhaps some of that terminology. And so then Rasaya in conversation here with another artist from the 43 group, Richard Gabriel. And again, the 43 group talked about often and spoken about just as the 43 group. Nobody knows really very much about their individual works, their individual practices as a group of artists. We're putting Rasaya in conversation with the 43 group, which has never been done. And here in conversation with two other images, or two paintings, etching in a painting by Richard Gabriel, images of the family. Family here where the father figure has turned his back. It's called Argument. And next to it is a Gabriel, and you can't see it too well perhaps, but the woman holding a child, and the child is just looking out at you. And it's called Frightened Child. And it's hard to know whether this child is frightened because of being held or frightened because of what's out there. So what is happening in the family that might frighten the child? And we showed it next to this work, which was a contemporary, again, a kind of introduction of a contemporary artist, which is an artist from the east coast of Sri Lanka, Nirumavasan. And it's these incredibly kind of striking images on a kind of cloth drawings and graphite of women who lost close family members during the civil conflict. So we move through this idyllic kind of pre-independence or post-independence imaging of the family, the nuclear family, the four-person family in the Keat, to the breaking up of the family, to eventually here the family reimagined, not through kinship, but through community. And how we have ties with one another now, I suppose, through things that connect us that are more about shared experiences, that the family can't care anymore, so we return to community. And in this case, these women looking after one another. Other exhibitions that we've done, which have explored perhaps something that I also just wanted to mention is something other than practicing the art history, but something that I would say we're involved with, which is the canon, that really unfashionable term, which is trying to understand the canon in Sri Lanka. And it's this very canotorial way of working, where with this particular exhibition I'm showing you here, where the goal is not to replace one canon with the other, but to kind of lay siege to what has been, normalized under the canon. And I think it's not to kind of establish something separate to it, but to kind of interrogate it a little bit, which raises this question of, I suppose, with relation to this exhibition, which is called The Foreigners, which is how the canon actually defines you as a Sri Lankan artist or not, and how you might not always fit in very neatly, therefore, to the canon which is defining you through the bordering of the nation state. So Sri Lanka as this nation state identity. And then in The Foreigners, which was the name of this exhibition, we wanted to think about being foreign through that you might be foreign to a community, you might be foreign to a language, you might be foreign to a culture, and a tradition that's your tradition and that's my tradition, and so I'm foreign to that tradition. So this show sort of began to, again, prize open. There was a start of, I think, what will hopefully be many exhibitions that's looking at what is a Sri Lankan artist, and can they be someone, I mean, in this case, where you see on the right here, Sri Lankan artist, question mark, who is British passport holder, born in the UK, lived for the majority of his life, 40, 50 years in Sri Lanka, Stephen Champion, photographer. And he's showing, what we're showing here is this very typical picture of the foreigner, the tourist, who Stephen shows us, it's very candid, caught kind of walking, what's she walking alongside? A swimming pool. It's this very gated, typical kind of spatial environment that most foreigners know when they come to Sri Lanka, the five-star hotel. And here we put it in conversation with a work next to it by Arjuna Gunaratna, no longer resident in Sri Lanka. He's in the UK. So they've both kind of, traded homes, as it were. And in Arjuna's work, it's a small work. He trained in Pakistan. What we see here is Arjuna. It's a self-portrait, and it's Arjuna donning, in the guise of this, he's the foreigner in this place called the UK, and he's gunning perhaps donning the attire of the privileged, wealthy people that he sees around him, and he's in this sort of bordered environment, I suppose, by the way you see all these kind of lines around the work. I'm going to just mention here that this was an exhibition also that we did, just to go off into a slightly different direction, on an architect, called Minette de Silva, who was born in 1918. Many of you I know would know Sri Lanka for the architecture, and probably the name that comes to mind is Geoffrey Bower. So Bower was born in 1990. So Minette and Bower are kind of a similar age, but Minette studies architecture and becomes an architect in 1948. Bower is yet to even think about architecture. And in 1948, when Sri Lanka gains independence, she comes back to Sri Lanka. She sets up her first studio as an architect, and it was called, wonderfully, the Studio of Modern Architecture. And she was one of two women in the world to set up her own studio as a woman. The other one is Linda Borbardi, the Italian-Brazilian architect. Before, women had set up architecture practices, but with their husbands who are architects. So in the case of this exhibition that we wanted to do, we focused not on Minette's entire practice. Again, this kind of deep dive in a lot of what we're doing, which is not to look at, trying to do everything. We just want to look at one work at a time. And look closely at a work. Like I said about the keep, that everyone went to that show, hopefully, and take away the memory of that one family and know when it was made and the name and the title of it. But in this case, we just decided to look at one project by Minette, which was a housing scheme, for the Watapalua housing scheme. But this was the toughest show to do because of one reason. when you start doing an exhibition, the sort of curator's typical checklist, was nothing on it. All her drawings, all of her models, all of the photographs destroyed, taken, lost. And that was difficult. But, you know, I think what I'm saying is also it's that difficult question that you have to engage with as an institution, or by one in the making, where you understand that what you do in terms of collecting and exhibition making contributes to this canon, this knowledge creation. And if you would talk about exhibitions, therefore, as contributing to this kind of critical creation of information, what happens, therefore, to artists, or in this case, architects, whose legacies endure, and we know them by name, but we have no idea really about their work in detail. And in this case, they endure, but in the absence of artifacts. How can we give up doing an exhibition just because we don't have work by them, if the exhibition holds this kind of value? So we turn to contemporary artists to help us do the research with us. You know, that is the most incredible thing that we have. Our resource is the artists that are living and working. And we work with three wonderful artists. Here they are, and they smile like this and look like this, and they were fascinating and brilliant to work with. And we worked with them for over a year and a half, researching Minette de Silva's Waterpolo housing scheme. And the research that we gave them to do was not going to be delivered as a report or an essay. That was not what we really set out to do. We asked them to make a work. And their work, because we had a sense too of how they were going to collaborate, it would be a moving image work. And so when they finalized this piece of work, it was indeed a piece of moving image work, and they described it as an animation documentary, and that is exactly what it was. And I'm pleased to say that this year it was awarded in Atlanta, Georgia. Or is it Georgia, Atlanta? No, it's Atlanta's in Georgia, right? It was awarded the social art historian, architectural historians award for architectural documentary, which obviously we were really delighted by. And what they did then was give us artifacts to work with, because in making this animation, they created drawings, they created puppets, they created all these things that we then work with to create the exhibition. I think I will just perhaps end here by talking about how, you know, one of the challenges in setting up a museum from scratch is finding ways to address what we have in situation in Sri Lanka, is to build a team of experts who are able to work in a museum context. And although the exhibition making has played a really important part, I hope I've been able to rattle through how that has helped train curators, exhibition designers, installers, editors, translators, and so on. You know, I think it would be truer and fairer at this point to say that our focus at the moment is really not on what we conserve and care for in terms of a collection. It's really how we care for ideas and a group of people. And that includes the artists who I've mentioned, who are living in Sri Lanka and who are living outside of Sri Lanka. So we have a huge diaspora. And in some ways, this is really a kind of fundamental shift away, perhaps, from what we see and understand as a museum. You know, when museology tells us that we should think about caring for, obviously, a building, but the assets of a collection, that we care for the collection above the people who will come and work there. And this is really where we are right now in the silent phase. It's training and creating a group of people who are going to have to be sizably, you know, size and depth of experience to be able to run a museum on a day-to-day basis. So press checking, doing things that I suppose, yeah, seem like rather mundane, but there's just, I can't tell you the list of things that needs to be put into place with training. And it's training above as well. And I put this in because this is some of the people that help fund MMCA. We have a group of people called founding patrons, and I'm training them to help them understand that when they give money, don't expect anything back. Because right now it's, being very transactional. But we have to get them into a place too where the giving is just to not expect anything back. So here we are taking them. I was taking them. I do a lot of work taking them to different places, and I make sure it's never more than 4 hours flying time from Sri Lanka. So here they are in Kale, in a place called the Art Hospital. A lot of caring going on here in this art hospital. And they're looking at conservation. What does conservation lab look like? Because conservation in Sri Lanka is normally tied to something that you do on a wall. Mural conservation. It's tied to archaeology. We look after the past, hence heritage. Then this group of people as well, who I would underline, are so key. They are our connection to our audiences. And we've created this group of people right from the beginning of creating the roles for people who are coming into a world of art that really has never felt accessible and open to them. Never. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about that. And I just want to talk about one of these people here in the team of what we call visitor educators. He is Dinal. He's the fourth person here. Moved through into being now part of our curatorial team, and he works side by side with me on the Minute to Silver. This was about, I think, 2 a.m. He's sitting there trying to figure out a whole load of install issues going on with the Minute to Silver exhibition. This was yesterday in the newspaper. He's got this, focus as the kind of face of a story that is, I think, more important than anything I've said about the museum. It's this. It's growing a group of people who are the most important thing. And that's really where my attention towards caring is focused. Thank you.
Can you hear me? From me, or I was already lucky to hear you a couple of days ago in Kolkata and get to know about the story of the museum in Sri Lanka, and I think it's a great joy to listen to it again. And I want to say thank you all for coming. Special thank you to the whole team at Helvetia for the invitation and for putting us together with Sharmini and Premjish. And of course, thank you to the India Art Fair team for having us, as well as Method Gallery. So this is my first time in India, and coming from a whole different context in Switzerland. I thought that this introduction maybe would be the best way to kind of tell you a bit about myself, about what I did before, for being representative of the institution of the Kunsthalle Basel. So I initially started my studies in history of art, and then was very focused in medieval art, and then switched more and more after conversations towards contemporary art, because I realized quickly that I was not really a historian per se. I was more interested in having these direct conversations with artists, really kind of opening up the impossible. Oh, sorry. Here. Okay. And really engaging with the community about what they would be willing to do to just kind of make their dreams also possible. And in a Swiss context, arriving in looking at institutions and galleries and even project spaces, we could realize that there was none of this space were really meant for us or our own. Sorry. And I think for this reason, when I moved back to Geneva with some friends, we really felt like the urgency of having our own space, of thinking of like what kind of what an exhibition space means to us and what an institution is lacking and what we can do more. And in this kind of like idea, we decided to open a space that's called Cherish. So Cherish was a project space that was held for me and my roommates, and we operated from our own living room with the little budget that we could have, and in a way to kind of like really open our doors to not only to a public but mainly to artists. In the construction of the house, we wanted to host artists to stay with us for a longer period of time to conceive the project together inside and to really kind of develop and produce the works as part of like a big kind of like household. So every invitation was meant or like directed as a small kind of residency, and where the artist would like kind of stay with us and really kind of like break bread together for a period of 1 month during the installation period. And that kind of really shifted my understanding of curating and what it means to open up our doors, not only to the public, but also to an artist, to the work that it presents, and what it means to care for them, and particularly what it means to host. So we had like some sort of like guidelines of the like can we say house rules for the house. Every artist would use the living room or the basement or the garden as they wished. The only rule was that it still make it livable, that it was still a place where we could be and operate it. I'm gonna share with you like some images of some exhibitions that we had. This was one of the first exhibition by Julia Esiad. And here, for example, she decided to let the couch usable, so for us to use, and kind of block the part of the living room. Because the living room was very humble, with one couch and one dining table, and that was like one of the two objects needed to be free for us to use, and this one was the couch. Here is an artist from New York named Kaisa von Zeipel, who completely kind of transformed during her stay here with us in the house, decided to transform the living room into her painting studio, and then created these sculptures made of like silicone and other tons of materials, but developed this narrative and the story of the painter being in a studio alone at night, and the story was like she fell asleep and her cats started and painted for her. And so the exhibition was when the cat paints. And so as you see, like the room was completely almost unusable, but then we were living with this art and this environment for like the whole period of time. This is another exhibition by Shuang Li. Shuang is a kind of a particular invitation. We invited Shuang for a residency of 3 months. But also during this time period, it was big lockdown and the big COVID took place. And some of the artists ended up staying longer for us because of travel restrictions or just logistics. And Shuang is one of them, and was completely kind of stuck in Switzerland for a long period of time, that at the end she ended up moving with us and became like a permanent member of the community and Cherish that we had. It was kind of really particular, and I mentioned this COVID moment because it really also like shifted how we use the space and how we open our doors to the public. During the lockdown in Switzerland, the only way and the only reason the only possibility for people to come see the shows was to host like dinners for a small group of people. So we started to this kind of like ritual day after day to host dinners and to invite people to come see the exhibitions. And so every exhibition, I mean, mind you, I can't cook, really. So it was always like putting other people at work and be like, hey, we invite you for dinner, but please cook. and then we're having a good time. And that kind of like really made me start to think about this idea of hosting, and all these questions that kind of led me now to that I try until today to answer. I was like, what it means to be a host, and do we host an exhibition, an artist, or the public, or all of the above? And how do we do it? Is it always through like these intimate gatherings of dinners, or could it be in a larger scale setting? And how can we really play with these differences and like these different scales, like in large, but also in very small. And that means also kind of creating a community around us and having people coming back all the time, and people that comes once and then comes back, and really creating a group around the space and around this house that we made, with between us and my flatmates. I'll pass on like some exhibitions footages and move on to maybe like another project. Yeah. It's too close. Yeah. It's too far. Okay. I hope it's better now. So these questions of like hosting and the domestic and the exhibition making in a domestic space also led me to also think of collections and what it means to work within this question in a collection, with an existing collection. So here we were like always kind of constrained into this house, using the collection of the city and displaying in a place where, like a heritage house that is kind of unwelcoming for an exhibition, where you couldn't hang anything. We had to build, to find ways to still present art without touching any walls. And here we kind of decided to use furnitures as walls and really creating, for example, using like these discarded like furnitures that we found in the street, and to use the surfaces to be able to present the works. This is another exhibition. Where are we going? Okay. I'm just showing you like a bit of these images. Okay. And going on to these questions of like hosting that led me to working closely with the Hardwig Art Foundation in Amsterdam, which is a completely different setting because it's a foundation that is just started, which has like the ambition to open a museum and open a collection. So the idea when I started working with them is to think of what it means to open a museum in a city like Amsterdam that has already so many different institutions, so many public collections. What does it mean to take another space for that? And so working closely with the foundation, I did like a research in the city and wondering and asking the art community and the centers what kind of space do they need, or what kind of space do they wish for, and how can this collecting institution adds up in the city, but also becoming a host for the public. So this project, like this research that I did, only lasted for a year before the construction of the future museum. And the future museum is taking place, or will be built up above or what used to be the former courthouse of Amsterdam. So it's also like kind of like this heavy history of like how to transform this architecture or this place into a welcoming space for visitors, and how can we exhibit works inside. So before the construction started, I had like the task to create one exhibition inside. And I quickly realized that it wasn't for me possible to only use the architecture as it is and to only present works, but I needed to activate it. It needed to be a place where people can navigate the space, but also that the space be living. So this exhibition took a new turn where instead of asking artworks from artists, I just asked them to write one scene of a theater play, a fictional play that they could invent. And after 16 contributions, we kind of edited them together. And with the work of Ivan Cheng, who's a performer himself, we kind of put together, like, directed this theater play that lasted 24 hours. So we can see here is like the museum, but the only kind of artwork that you could experience on the ground level was mainly like this display. And each artworks that we presented as physical works were used as a stage design or as a kind of also performative element for display. Here is another room with Akitami, where she kind of decided to document this performance and this theater play by having a Xerox printing machine and inviting everybody to kind of put their own implication or like their own participation, and at the end publishing or self-publishing a zine about the play. Here are like other works by Oscar Carr and Mira Lee that were like also used as a stage design. And now where I am today is the Kunsthalle Basel. A quick introduction to the institution of Kunsthalle, that is the Kunsthalle Basel. We are an art association that was founded a little bit more than 154 years ago, the first and largest art institution in Switzerland. And it was founded by local artists who needed a space to exhibit outside of the big collecting museum that is the Kunsthalle. They wanted a space that is more dynamic and more made for the local artist. It's funny to think of its origins like this now, because now the Kunsthalle also represents a sort of a beacon and status quo of what an institution is. And in my year at the head of this institution, I'm trying to kind of subvert the status quo. And by asking the same questions that I did in past years with Cherish or with the Hardwig, and like what it means to host and what it means to care for an audience and a community. And quickly I realized that in Basel, it wasn't about creating a community, because it was very much present, but it was about changing it or like recreating or bringing different people inside and not making it necessarily larger, but more shuffling and like changing that now, and to really kind of bringing a bit of my own community into the one that exists, and really kind of distance or abolish with the idea that the institution is a solid block and like hasn't changed for 150 years, and it's time now like really to think of the institution as perpetual changes. So this presentation, I will go through like some exhibitions that we did here at the Kunsthalle with some artists that we're going, but then also to present also like some different ideas of how to achieve this moment of like change in the institutions. And I think it goes with like very small thing, creating also not only an exhibition program, but also a public program with different, that is tailored and catered for also different artists and practitioners, not only visual, but bringing also performances a bit more, to bring the theater inside the museum, to bring music outside of the museum as well, to use like the different spaces, but really to speak of like different types and genres that they can to everybody. So one aspect for it is this project that has been going on for about 10 years, that is the Backwall project. And here, to kind of also pay homage and to really understand the position of project spaces like Cherish, like how I started, or the many different project spaces or artist-led initiatives, as really like the beginning of all art system. Many of the artists started in project spaces, and that led them to a gallery exhibition or to an institutional exhibition. But then for many times, quite often the spaces are a bit forgotten. So for this wall, I wanted not to only invite an artist, but to invite a project space to come curate it and together to think of like one presentation. So for example, this year we will invite a project space from London called Gallerina that is also a space, like an artist-run space operating from an apartment. It was kind of like a nod to what I did before. And with Gallerina, they invited an artist from their program called Kumbasamba to come do it and to kind of like give the space, but not to per necessarily an artist, but more to an organization. Here is like also quite important for me to bring in this exhibition of like the regional, like local voices inside of the museum, and not only pairing them with like just thinking about the young emerging artists, but also looking at like the artists who have been living in Basel, in the city, who have been worked for decades, and like also connecting them with a younger crowd and really putting their work in dialogue with like different generations. This was an exhibition with Neil Beloufa. And in the summer, I think one changes that would happen in terms with what we think of like the institutions being permanently changes is also an institution for me that really goes with its time, that understands the seasons in which it operates as well. I mean, in Switzerland, every summer has like very long days. The sun set like at around 9 p.m. But then like in the morning, it's very hot. People would rather be like in the river, have a swim. And it was made me think of like who actually comes to the museum on a July on a 30 degrees at noon. Everybody's outside, and I think even I would like to prefer to be outside. So let's just change the opening hours and open the museum only from 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. and to really kind of adjust with its time, not only like in years, but also in the seasons, and create like maybe more events or bringing to understand also what's happening in the city around the summer. In Basel, the graduate shows, or like the students from the art school, work all summer because of the diploma is at the end of August. So it means that the whole kind of like young art scene is present in the city, and there's not so much for them to do. So here we're creating a space where local artists could come and perform, and for like 1 hour and do like a sound performance from the workshop of the institution during these like long summer days. So really kind of also bringing them and being more, I think, listening to the city and like what it needs at the moment. Those are like only images of like different exhibitions that we did, or like different performance or events that we hold into the goal of like creating or regenerating this new community around the Kunsthalle. And the program that I put together that started now in January, starting with Marie Matous, who's a Basel artist. And this was kind of particular because it was also the first time since 2017, or no, even more, than a Basel-based artist had a solo exhibition in Basel at the Kunsthalle. So I think it was also kind of shifting the narrative and making the space or the institutions more accessible for the local scene, and less seeing it as the kind of this distant, kind of scary institution that is made for the people abroad. This is another way or format to trying to kind of subvert the different practice that we invite in. So here we not only we invited Valentin Noujaim, who's not a visual artist, but more of a filmmaker, and to bring the cinema inside as an exhibition. And a really important way of working for me is always commissioning new works, is really to accompany the artist in the creation or like the conception of a new project, of an exhibition, and we're following them in the steps. So for this exhibition, maybe with Dalanasa, when she came to visit the space for the first time and looking at the architecture and the height, she decided and wanted to build a church inside of the museum, a church that was like kind of destroyed, a church in South Lebanon that is now completely destroyed, and really kind of want to bring the ruins and to make it accessible only here at the Kunsthalle. And so we've been working on, like, for more than a year in bringing this church together, this project alive, going from like the carpenter team to like the fabric dyes that she uses, working in Lebanon, in South Lebanon, to Basel, and always with the discussions and the follow-up to really make this project possible. This was another exhibition by Sar Serpas, who was one of the co-founder of Cherish. Is someone that was a kind of, did to me a close collaborator and a great artist, and really to try to bring not only her paintings, but a presentation that she worked with, collaborated with a theater performance company from Tbilisi, a theater company that is now kind of inactive, but we brought them back and reactivated them. And it was a project that she initiated many years ago, but kept on being canceled again and again because of the, I don't know, it was a bit too complicated for the other institutions to do. And then since last July, we've been like a year working on this with this theater company to bring them on and to develop performances that took place here with new performers, but really having the artist, Sar Serpas, as a painter, direct or appropriate these performances that took place. This was like a performance kitchen drama that we see. And the last, again, moment of like gathering a community together is like using this and creating a crowd with our community around music. And here was a concert by Le Duc that we did. Yeah. And I think all of these aspects are like making in such a big scale now with this institution always kind of brings me back to what we did many years ago with Cherish. I mean, not so many years ago, it was like 2 years ago. But what we did in a very smaller scale from the living room and to kind of like extend it to like this public institution and to really think of like these different ideas of scale, but like also how care is presented in really intimate space, but how can we also bring the same attention of care for like everyone, for like a larger scale. And I think in the past days in Kolkata, during the conversations, there was this one quote that kept on like getting stuck with me and then kept coming back, is that what we do is maybe not for you, but for everyone. And I think this is like a quote from a fashion designer named Telfar, but it kind of applies as well from the institutions here. It's not for one person specifically, but for the rest of the all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those presentations and introducing your wider range of practice, years of practice into that nutshell 15 minutes which you had. So as I said, I wanted to start the discussion on collaboration in terms of collaboration not only among the artists, among the participants, among the what you call within the institutions you're working with, but also the collaboration in terms of the wider network of people you're bringing into the institution. Like your case when you talked about Mina De Silva's exhibition that you collaborated with the artists and all, to touch upon to touch upon issues about authorship. And this is also in relation to the question of care, repair. To quote, I think one of the strategies of Hans Ulrich Obrist when he says that collaboration is the answer, but what is the question? Like here again, care is the answer, repair is the answer, but what is the question? And we know that there are diversities of questions. There are numerous questions, numerous concerns that arise. There are various issues that are haunting us, and there are various perspectives that are drawn into this discussion. But these are also not about the questions like why collaborate, why care, why repair, but it is also about these practices which bring these diverse voices together and not give enough thought about how do we manage these discussions, how do we manage these deliberations, that how do we form consensus from these collaborations, who speaks on behalf of who takes decisions on behalf of whose voice is more heard. And these are some of the important discussions and points I think that we need to think about that when we talk about collaborative practices. Because there's a lure of repair, there's a lure of care, there's a lure of collaboration. And most of these practices are also now easily co-opted into the institutional space. So to start with you, Mohamed, I want to ask you in terms of ferocious collaborative impulse that it had. And from that, moving to the larger scale of Kunsthalle, Basel, how do you avoid the common pitfalls of defined roles and responsibilities that become rigid hierarchies, or also these prescriptive strategies that becomes part of the institutions to attain certain impacts, attain certain bureaucratic goals? How do you overcome that in order to ensure a genuine, authentic, collaborative, inclusive practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think, wow. I mean, I didn't have like the kind of typical institutional parkour in my career. Never really worked in an institution before Kunsthalle Basel. I kind of opened or like built my own mini institution from my living room per se. So, and that like gave me some freedom and allowed me to kind of do it on my own way and the rule. I think with the collaborative aspect that starts, I mean, before everything with my flatmates, that kind of like, that did the whole Cherish program with me. Even sometimes, I mean, there was kind of my idea and like kind of my impulse to start this project, but I kind of had to force them to be part of it because we were living together, and then they're kind of like all doing it. But this is what like the biggest collaboration that that we could do that lasted in years, and that also like required a lot of care around it. And then coming to an institution with like kind of really established also hierarchies, and like in terms of collaborations and collaborators working on, is also to develop this level of care with every collaborators, a bit of the same kind of flair. So I'd like to think that the way that maybe I run the institution with a kind of like anti-institutional flair to it. But I think also like care takes time. It's a very, like it takes a long time for this kind of whole process of care could be really developed at its best. And it took a lot of time with every collaborators at Cherish and like my flatmates for the first, to kind of develop this project together, to also convince them to open our doors to everybody really who wanted to come visit the space, but also to engage them in the process, as much as it takes time at the Kunsthalle to develop also this level of care with not only the artist and the public or the audience, but to begin with the collaborators and the team, and kind of create this complicity and also to care for each other and to care together for the institute. Or
Thank you. Sharmini, I wanted to ask, uh, there, in Sri Lanka's context and also South Asian context, there are this historical power imbalance that persists in the formation of imagination of heritage and also the tangible, intangible ideas about heritage. Uh, what is modern, what is contemporary, and as also you said, uh, challenging the canon is very important. That how history is written. In that, to counter that, when you are framing a participatory project, a participatory strategy to challenge that, dismantle that, or question that. How does this or these mechanisms or strategy uh, not become a form of civic utility or tokenism? But like, how do you ensure? Like, I can see from the various things, but how still the organization ensures that as a value that it does not just reduce as token, just not reduce as civic.
I mean, what I want to begin by saying, I think, is when you're talking about collaboration, there's already an inequity somewhere because there's somebody inviting. You don't sort of at the same moment say, we're going to collaborate, 2, 4, 6, 8, let's collaborate. It's not instantaneous like that. So there's already at the, if I was to say it like this, there's already an inequity in the collaboration at the start. And that's something that is worth unpacking before maybe I'm not going to not answer your question, but I think there's, the collaboration comes with capital, money, fiscal, kind of maybe undertaking. I want to do this with you because I want this in return. And I think collaboration is not this, I'm just saying maybe it's not the most caring in its own structural, makeup. So that was one thing I wanted to just open up a little bit there or elaborate on. And when we also think about collaboration, and particularly because this is a panel speaking about hosting, and actually some of what's happened at, I think, in Cherish that I could say, is anecdotally, it's a space that was a host, playing host. And it immediately calls to mind the parasite, that the incoming of something, and that they were made to feel discomfort. Like literally the sofa was not necessarily the place that they could go and sit down, like quite literally. So what are we thinking about when we talk about that in terms of an institution? To take it back to try to answer or respond perhaps to what you're saying. I mean, we, in terms of MMCA Sri Lanka, I don't think we're doing anything very participatory at the moment.
Okay.
We are, I think, also rather skeptical about collaboration for the reasons I've said, because it brings with it a lot of, as I say, already there's an imbalance in what we might be setting out to us. But what maybe is there in amidst those, we're not really doing something that's participatory, is just to evoke the audience. And the audience, by definition, linguistically, they're the audio, they're listening. Well, what are we telling them? And I think that's back to us again as the host. What are we bringing them to us? What are we bringing? Why are we bringing them to us? Because what have we got to say?
Yeah.
And are we saying that in a language they understand? And which language are we using? I mean, the kind of work that we are doing around working trilingually has also involved us to look at, words in these other languages that don't exist, and to find words to explain some of the things that we're trying to do in this English language. So it's very complex, I think, too. I'd say there's a complexity in saying that that we might be doing anything that anyone would want to participate in, and that the audiences out there can choose to do so many other things as well. So why would they choose the choice to come to do what we're doing and visit us?
Thank you. Also want to extend what you said about host, the idea of host. The idea of host attacked by parasites. I think parasitic practices are also, again, an important strategy, which against a lot. But the term host also remind me of the classical Bram Stoker's Dracula, who invite the character. And he is this ideal host, but traps the guest, Jonathan, at his fate. And for me, institutions are also like that. These are vice versa situations where new strategies, new practices infiltrate and weaken the institution. What the institution can also appropriate these practices and can also weaken the strategies and the practice. And especially in terms of curatorial strategies, we also function through a paradox. The paradox of select, that it's not, this hosting is not unconditional in that way, because we need to select, we have to operate through certain restrictions, and there are also resource allocations we have to. There are boundary maintenance distances that we have to keep with the host. There are certain like distances that restrict the unconditional hospitality, which also is taken from Derrida's idea when you talked about true hospitality. It also resonated with Derrida's conditional hospitality. But would we be able to achieve that unconditional hospitality while hosting? What are the challenges which you have realized while hosting?
I mean, I do think that sometimes, I mean, what I see also with institutions is that the hosting becomes also a bit kind of exploitative. And I think the hosting becomes a bit exploitative in a way that there is something that is maybe expected in return, or there is this, I don't know, as Sharmini said, it's also a collaboration, but also this is not equal in the terms of like when you're a host and a guest. So maybe this is, in that sense, I would like this idea of like parasiting the hospitality, or taking a bit over and to kind of really making it your own. But definitely, I think there is also still an imbalance between the host and the guest, or like the fact of hosting and coming. I don't know what you think about it.
Well, when thinking about the institution, maybe we don't have to give the institution so much responsibility. Kind of seeing what institutions do. Maybe we have to, our expectation for what they do maybe needs to be challenged a little bit more. And, when maybe thinking about when we were talking about what are we caring, what is it that we want to care for? What is it that we're trying to repair?
Yeah.
And think of the institute. I mean, it could be artist, institution, curator. You could transpose any of these names for thinking about the curator as problem solver, the curator as problem gatherer, and we were talking a little bit about this at Experimenta. Like as an artist, if your work doesn't have a problem, then forget it. No one's going to be that interested. There was a great audience participant saying, I don't really have any problems, so what would I do? But the artist, the curator, the institution as problem solver, really, is it? Is it not the is it not? I mean, the problem maker, the agitator, perhaps is also a bit naive as well to think about today when we think about bigger problems. Maybe the institution, the artist, the curator, interchangeably are the problematizer. I speak as someone who's trying to create an institution, but you can't kind of create spaces that I think people are going to rely on for. I mean, what are we really responsible for? I wouldn't want people coming there thinking we're going to repair them, solve their problem. I mean, I'm just being really, I'm sounding very facetious, but I'm being intentionally kind of, I'm questioning what we expect from institutions today.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's more. I mean, the way I do it and the way I like to do it is more with the artist directly. And so, like, the role of the institution is, the way I see it, is to really like enable artists being artists and giving them the platform to express and to do this. And then, if we can be the person that enables this to make it possible, then I'm very happy with it. I think also the way that I don't really make historical exhibitions, or I'm really more interested in really this dialogue and this relationship with the artist. And I think this is where I take also great joy, and also I feel my responsibility as a curator is to make it possible for the artist to be practice, become an artist for his work, and to also, as said, not only present it but also protect the work and the artist and the art that he's doing. So I think the way that I see it is also like this, more of a like enabler as an.
Okay, thank you. And I think there are more questions from the audience. I'll open it up. Yeah. Yeah. Do we have a mic? Or you'll have to speak loud. These are
Too.
Mean to get up. Okay. It's meant to just be sitting there.
This is how you're co-opted.
Well, so just a few observations. I was very interested in how the notion of repair has been co-opted into care. Repair and care maybe aren't exactly mutually placeable in my thinking. So I wanted you to speak to that a little bit. In terms of repair, I was always thinking, and Sharmini, it reminds me of an exhibit we did here at the National Museum on Sri Lanka, now exactly 10 years ago. And it was a fascinating experience because, yes, a lot of it was based on artifacts and collections that were existing in specifically Colombo at the National Museum over there at the time. Of course, some of it was also from Ismat Rahim's own collection, who is a fascinating historian, of course, there. One of the moments at which I remember speaking to Sharmini Pereira, who was part of our exhibit, as well as she was very clear about the fact that the exhibition should be seen within the institution that was here, the National Museum, when we did it, was here, as not a finality, as not a place of its final resting place, but as just a stopgap to understand what those contemporary slash archival intonations were about. But within that show, so getting a little bit to the history of it, and I was fact checking a little bit with Nimaya over here on the 43 group that Harold Pierce was part of. There was this fascinating interaction they had with Shantiniketan. And when you were talking about histories and countercultures, histories of that kind, my understanding of that moment, history of Sri Lanka and the 43 group and others, was that they were too trying to be counterculture, especially at a time that was transitioning from pre to post-colonial. It happened quite extensively in India. It happened in Sri Lanka as well. So how do you actually use those notions of that relationship artists had in the 40s and 50s that in their minds was somewhat countercultural? And do they have any resonances to the transposition you're making with countercultural acts through a community space, a community imperative like the museum today? Is there a transference? Because when you started your talk, you began with this astounding number of museums that you said that are in Sri Lanka at this day. Did you say 1,200?
120.
120? That's an extensive number of museums. What do those museums do? And maybe you can speak a little more to how the space that you have set up, the MMCA, and its straddling of the institutional, non-institutional, of its historical, but its counter-history, right, of its contemporary, but with a history of George Keat and so on and so forth, especially with reference to your exhibition over there, Encounters, that was also taken from the George Keat Foundation's archives, a kind of response to that, if I'm not mistaken. So I suppose my question was these shifts, historical, contemporary, within the schema of Sri Lanka that has been, that you talked about, the civil war and so on. How do you, is it still important to look at those historical references within the contemporary in a space like the MMCA? How do you do that? How, or is the MMCA going to be a space in which the historical, the art historical, rather my question is, how is the art historical seen within the MMCA? As you have all of these evidences of countercultural activities taking place from the 40s onwards as well. That's one. I suppose my question to Mohamed was somewhat related. Did you say you did art history as you study the history of art? That was your background. So I was interested to know, because of the performances, the happenings that you are making occur within the context of Kunsthalle Basel. What in your training of the history of art, is something that you're challenging within the institution today? I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry for going into loops. I was not expecting to stand here.
Raha, before you move from the spotlight, can you tell me the question again?
It's a good question. I suppose.
Or was it just that I know that there was a lot of observations there?
It was an observation. I suppose it came from my response to the idea of repair as something that needs to be fixed, right? You referred to that. The idea of repair is there's a severing, there's a rupture, and the act of repair does what to it? Is it to fix it? Is it to fill a gap? Is it to sort of create a link where none existed or that did exist and has been broken? Given there is some reference also to those distinct moments of maybe artist groups and histories pre and post Civil War that are important countercultural moments. You referred to Stephen Champion. It was wonderful. I ended up meeting him when I was in London some years ago, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. Is that since that does exist, how is the framing of the MMCA taking those histories of counterculture, using those histories that might have existed, and seeing it as bringing it to the present? Like, is your sense of history to link? Is it also to create a break with history to say we have to start afresh. This is a space that is an institution but is also a non-institution. I don't know if
that clarified it.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're really not setting out to fix anything. What we don't have in Sri Lanka is, of the 120 museums which exist in the country, is any space that is talking about, through the exhibitions, the programs that happen there, visual culture that was made, has been made over the last, as I said, 120 plus years. So if we're going to fix anything, it would be just that, to try to address how we create a space in which, I suppose, very traditionally, the museum would be thinking about doing that through a collection. But what I'm saying right now is that the focus is not on collecting and collecting. It's looking at building a museum through research that is understanding what those histories of art would entail. And we can do that through building a collection at some point. But right now, that's not really of importance. And what we're seeing is that through the exhibition making, that we're giving rise to, through the commissioning of work, a lot of artworks that we will take care of as we go forward. But I think it's just thinking about a museum as not necessarily a space that is just about accumulation of things. But equally, you have to think too about how in Sri Lanka the whole notion of history has, it's been rendered in many ways something that is about different truths. So, in the time span of your show, which I haven't seen, I've heard about the last 10 years, but the war ended in the military cessation of activities in Sri Lanka was 2009. We're 16 years on, and at the macro level, we haven't addressed the repair that needs to come out of that. So why, as a museum, do we set out to kind of repair something that beyond us is still so far away from being repaired? And why I say we're not trying to fix anything, I'll give it to you in a very concrete way, is that we're very particular about not taking any funds, in fact, from the development sector, because the development sector sets out to fix the problem. And there's a lot of money swimming around, which is towards supporting art projects or cultural, seeing culture playing a role in repair, reconciliation. There's so many different words for it. But those that we have not gone after any of that funding, and when we have, we've been doing it for very specific reasons that were on the terms we felt were there that benefited artists, and the creation of an institution that was not going to just rely on that kind of funding.
To go back to my question.
Yeah. Your training and how
Yeah. I think
I thought I was the one who was confusing you guys. Then. Thank you.
I don't know, like when I initially studied history of art, my main focus was medieval art, and I was really into, I wrote my bachelor thesis on the miniatures in books, and like religious books in codex or like in the miniatures in religious books from Persia times. I was really interested in this idea of like representation, figuration, but outside of the object of the book, and also this idea of printmaking. So, which is completely different from what I do now. I mean, not completely, but I always found that medieval art and contemporary art were somehow like a lot of similarities. There was this moment of like breaking rules or kind of experimenting in the idea of like representation of what does a figuration means, or kind of still kind of like setting up everything. And I remember I was having a lot of arguments with this my teachers, and I think like one of the first exhibition I ever kind of put together was in a classroom at the university, and I printed out images of artworks that I found that connected, and then I invited some friends from the art school to also bring it together, and I had like this kind of exhibition with prints, photocopies of artworks and some drawings from friends, and that was that, and my teachers were very unhappy about it. And I think that's also when I kind of decided to move more towards contemporary art and to really engage in these kind of conversations and dialogue with the artists directly. But up until now, I see that an artist like Serre or Dalla, like the way they work and the way they practice their art is really going back to this idea of like experimenting with representation, or this idea of like production to reproduction. I mean, it kind of like really links to many things that I see in that I was interested in initially in medieval art. So maybe that my practice now today with like the exhibitions that I put together, but also the performances that I invite or like I host in the museum is goes in this lineage. I mean, time will tell, I don't know, but I think this was kind of the interesting is to just connect the medieval times with the contemporary, with like jumping over the modern times. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time? No. Sorry. Yeah, I think, we're running. I think we have a bit more time, and I think we'll have to close here. Thank you, Mohamed, and thank you,
you.
Sharmini. I forgot to thank India Art Fair for hosting this event, and I think that happens because when you start living together, like we work from the same space, so you take things for granted. But sorry for that. But thank you, India Art Fair team, and thank you for hosting this, and thank you everyone for joining. And both of them are here, so if you have more questions, you can continue the conversation.